Verivkina Cave is located in the Arabica Massif of the Western Caucasus Mountains in Georgia. There is a hole in the earth that descends 2,212 meters. This is not a typo or an estimate. It is the deepest verified cave on the planet, confirmed through decades of systematic exploration and precise measurement. The number is so large that most people hear it and feel nothing because the human brain was not built to process that kind of darkness. Verivkina Cave was first identified in the 1960s, but its true depth was not understood for years. The cave did not give up its secrets easily. Every expedition pushed deeper than the last, and every team that descended returned with the same report. The cave kept going. It was not until 2018 that a Russian speleological team finally reached the bottom at 2,112 meters, setting the world record for the deepest known cave on Earth. The descent alone takes multiple days, and the return journey is even longer. What lies inside is not what most people imagine when they think of a cave. Verivkina is not a dark, empty tunnel. It is a vertical world of staggering geological complexity. There are underground rivers moving through pitch-black chambers. There are waterfalls that fall so far into the dark that the sound arrives before the water does. There are passages so narrow that explorers must remove their equipment and push it ahead of them just to squeeze through, hundreds of meters below the surface with no fast way out. The geological formations inside the cave have taken millions of years to build. Stalactites and stalagmites of extraordinary scale-line chambers that no natural light has ever touched. The rock itself tells a story of ancient seabeds, tectonic shifts, and millions of years of slow water erosion. Scientists who have studied samples pulled from its depths describe the formations as unlike anything found in surface geology. The cave is, in the most literal sense, a preserved record of the Earth's interior history. What makes Verivkina genuinely unsettling is not its darkness or its depth alone, but the combination of both with complete isolation. At maximum depth, a rescue operation would take days under optimal conditions. There is no communication with the surface and no natural light. The air pressure shifts noticeably as you descend. The underground rivers that flow through its lower chambers are cold enough to cause hypothermia within minutes of exposure. And yet, people go. Explorers, scientists, and cavers travel from across the world to descend into this specific darkness. Not because it is safe or comfortable, but because it exists at the edge of what the Earth will allow a human being to survive. The cave is real, the depth is confirmed, and the bottom has only been reached once. Denman Glacier. Beneath the ice of East Antarctica, there is a canyon so deep that it defies easy comprehension. The Denman Glacier sits above a subglacial trench that descends 3,352 meters below sea level. That makes it the deepest point on continental Earth, not the deepest ocean or the deepest underwater trench, but the deepest point on land. It is buried under ice so thick and heavy that the rock beneath it has been pressed down over millions of years into a wound in the earth that no human being has ever seen and likely never will. The Denman Glacier was not always understood to be this deep. It took the development of advanced ice-penetrating radar technology to map what lay beneath the surface. When scientists finally processed the data, the numbers stopped them. A canyon stretching 3,152 meters below sea level, hidden entirely beneath Antarctic ice, holding more frozen water than any single glacier in East Antarctica. The discovery was recent enough that its full implications are still being calculated. What concerns scientists is not the depth alone, but what is happening to that depth right now. The Denman Glacier is melting, not slowly or gradually in a way that allows for comfortable projections, but retreating at a pace that has accelerated measurably in recent decades. Between 1996 and 2017, the glacier's front edge retreated approximately 5 kilometers. That number sounds manageable until you understand the geometry beneath it. The canyon below the Denman Glacier slopes inward. This means that as the glacier retreats, it exposes deeper sections of rock to the warming ocean water beneath the ice. Warmer water accelerates melting. Faster melting exposes more depth. More depth means more contact with warm water. Scientists describe this as a feedback loop with no natural brake mechanism. Once it begins in earnest, there is no known process that reverses it. The volume of ice currently locked inside the Denman system is capable of raising global sea levels by approximately 1.5 meters if fully discharged into the ocean. That figure represents tens of millions of people living in coastal zones worldwide. It represents entire island nations and centuries of infrastructure built at elevations that would no longer exist above the waterline. What makes the Denman Glacier particularly difficult to study is its location. East Antarctica is one of the most remote and inaccessible places on Earth. Ground-based verification of the radar data is extraordinarily difficult. Most of what scientists know comes from satellite imagery, airborne surveys, and ice-penetrating instruments that measure without ever touching. The deepest continental point on Earth is not a stable geological feature sitting quietly in the dark. It is an active system under pressure, changing on a timeline that is no longer geological. The canyon exists, the ice above it is retreating, and the ocean water below it is getting warmer every year. Philippine Trench. In the western Pacific Ocean, east of the Philippine archipelago, the seafloor opens into a darkness that descends 10,540 meters below the surface. That is not a geological estimate. It is a measured, verified depth. There are 34,980 feet of water column pressing down on a narrow canyon carved by forces that operated on timescales human civilization cannot meaningfully comprehend. The Philippine Trench is one of the deepest places on Earth, and it sits in one of the most geologically violent regions on the planet. The trench was formed by the subduction of the Philippine Sea Plate beneath the Eurasian Plate. Subduction is not a gentle process. One tectonic plate is forced beneath another at pressures and temperatures that crush and melt rock over millions of years. The Philippine Trench is the surface expression of that violence. A long, narrow scar in the ocean floor, running approximately 1,720 kilometers in length and averaging around 30 kilometers in width. It stretches along the eastern coast of the Philippines in a region already known for seismic instability, volcanic activity, and some of the most powerful earthquakes ever recorded. At 10,540 meters, the pressure at the bottom of the Philippine Trench reaches approximately 1,150 times the atmospheric pressure experienced at sea level. A human body exposed to that pressure without protection would not simply be crushed. The process would be near instantaneous. The water itself behaves differently at that depth. Its density increases, its temperature drops to just above freezing, and the darkness is so complete that no photon of sunlight has ever penetrated to the floor. Whatever lives down there has never seen light. It has evolved in permanent cold, permanent darkness, and pressure that would destroy any surface organism within seconds. And things do live there. Scientific expeditions have recovered organisms from the deepest sections of the Philippine Trench that challenge basic assumptions about the conditions required to sustain life. Amphipods, small crustaceans, have been found in significant numbers at extreme depths. Microbial communities thrive in the sediment at the bottom. The trench is not a dead zone. It is an ecosystem operating under conditions that should, by surface logic, make life impossible. The Philippine Trench also sits at the intersection of multiple tectonic boundaries. The region experiences frequent seismic activity directly linked to the subduction dynamics that created the trench. When large earthquakes occur along this boundary, the displacement of water generates tsunamis that have historically struck the Philippine coastline with devastating force. The trench is not a passive feature. It is an active geological system whose movements have shaped and continue to shape the region above it. No human being has ever reached the bottom of the Philippine Trench. The technology required to survive that depth exists, but targeted exploration of this specific trench remains limited. The floor is there, the pressure is real, and the darkness at 10,540 meters has never once been interrupted. Mponeng Gold Mine. In the Gauteng province of South Africa, there is a hole in the earth that human hands carved deliberately, methodically, and at extraordinary cost over decades of industrial ambition. The Mponeng gold mine descends 4,023 meters below the surface. That is 2.5 miles straight down into the earth. It is the deepest mine ever constructed by human beings, and it remains fully operational today. Every day, workers descend into a darkness that no natural process created. A darkness that exists entirely because someone calculated that enough gold lay at the bottom to justify building a passage to reach it. The mine is located in the West Wits region of Gauteng, embedded in the Witwatersrand Basin, a geological formation that holds one of the richest gold deposits ever discovered on Earth. The Witwatersrand has produced more gold than any other single source in recorded human history. Estimates suggest it has yielded nearly 40% of all gold ever mined globally. Mponeng sits at the deepest point of this system, chasing seams of gold-bearing rock called reefs that run through ancient sedimentary layers formed approximately 2.7 billion years ago. Getting to the working levels of Mponeng is itself an engineering challenge of remarkable scale. Workers travel in multi-stage cage systems, industrial elevators that drop at speed through vertical shafts carved through kilometers of solid rock. A single descent to the deepest working levels takes over an hour. The infrastructure required to keep that descent functional includes ventilation systems, refrigeration units, and water cooling networks operating continuously. Without active cooling, the ambient rock temperature at maximum depth reaches 60 degrees Celsius. The rock itself radiates heat generated by the pressure of kilometers of earth above it. The conditions at the deepest levels of Mponeng are hostile in ways that surface environments rarely match. The air must be artificially cooled and circulated. The noise of ongoing drilling and blasting echoes through tunnels that extend horizontally for kilometers from the main shafts. The rock at those depths is under enormous pressure, and spontaneous rock bursts, sudden, violent fractures in the tunnel walls, remain a genuine operational hazard. The mine employs seismic monitoring systems specifically to detect stress buildup in surrounding rock before it releases. What science has found inside Mponeng was not expected. In 2008, researchers studying water trapped in isolated fissures at extreme depth discovered microbial life. Single-celled organisms were living in water that had been sealed from the surface for millions of years. These organisms survive with no sunlight, no surface nutrients, and no connection to the ecosystem above. They represent some of the most isolated life forms ever documented. Mponeng is not open to the public. Access is restricted to mine personnel and authorized researchers. The gold it produces is real, the depth is confirmed, and the conditions inside it have no comparison in any human-made structure on Earth. The descent takes over an hour, the rock temperature without cooling exceeds human survival limits, and the work continues every single day. Atacama Trench. Off the western coast of South America, where the Nazca Plate drives itself beneath the South American Plate with slow and irresistible force, the Pacific Ocean floor splits open into one of the longest and deepest trenches on Earth. The Atacama Trench, also known as the Peru-Chile Trench, stretches approximately 5,900 kilometers along the coastline of Peru and Chile, making it one of the longest continuous oceanic trenches ever mapped. At its deepest recorded point, it descends 8,065 meters below the ocean surface. That is over 5 miles of water column pressing down on a narrow canyon that runs the length of an entire continent's western edge. The trench was formed by one of the most geologically consequential subduction zones on the planet. The Nazca Plate, moving eastward at roughly 7 to 8 centimeters per year, slides beneath the South American Plate in a process that has been ongoing for millions of years. The energy released by this collision does not dissipate quietly. The subduction zone responsible for the Atacama Trench has generated some of the most powerful earthquakes in recorded human history. The 1960 Valdivia earthquake, the most powerful ever measured at a magnitude of 9.5, originated directly from this tectonic boundary. The 2010 Chile earthquake, registering 8.8 in magnitude, came from the same system. The trench is not a passive scar on the ocean floor. It is an active geological engine producing seismic events of catastrophic scale on a recurring timeline. At 8,065 meters, the pressure at the bottom of the Atacama Trench exceeds 800 times the atmospheric pressure at sea level. The temperature hovers just above freezing, and the darkness is absolute, never having been penetrated by natural light. These are conditions that eliminate virtually every form of life adapted to surface environments. And yet, scientific expeditions into the trench have returned with findings that challenge fundamental assumptions about biological limits. Snailfish, small translucent deep-sea fish, belonging to the family Leporidae, have been documented living at extraordinary depths within the Atacama Trench. These organisms have developed physiological adaptations that allow them to function under pressures that would destroy the cellular structure of most known species. Their bodies contain high concentrations of trimethylamine oxide, a chemical compound that stabilizes proteins under extreme pressure conditions. They represent some of the deepest living vertebrates ever recorded. The discovery of snailfish at these depths has fundamentally shifted scientific thinking about the lower boundaries of complex life. If vertebrates can survive at over 8,000 meters, researchers now believe the trench may harbor additional species at even greater depths, organisms that no expedition has yet reached or identified. The Atacama Trench stretches along one of the most seismically active coastlines on Earth. Its depths remain largely unexplored. Its biological communities are only partially understood. The earthquakes it generates are real. The species inside it are confirmed, and the bottom of it has barely been touched. Puerto Rico Trench. At the boundary where the Atlantic Ocean meets the Caribbean Sea, the ocean floor drops away into a darkness that holds a specific and unsettling distinction. The Puerto Rico Trench descends 8,376 meters below the surface, making it the deepest point in the entire Atlantic Ocean. It sits approximately 120 kilometers north of Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands, running roughly 800 kilometers in length along a tectonic boundary that geologists describe as one of the most complex and least understood plate interactions on Earth. The depth is confirmed, the instability is documented, and the potential consequences of what moves beneath it are still being calculated. The trench sits at the intersection of the North American plate and the Caribbean plate. But the dynamics here are not a straightforward subduction zone. The boundary involves a combination of subduction, transform faulting, and lateral plate movement that creates a geological environment of exceptional complexity. The North American plate is moving westward relative to the Caribbean plate, but the motion is neither clean nor consistent. There are sections of the boundary where the plates lock, accumulating stress over decades before releasing it in seismic events. Scientists have identified multiple fault systems operating simultaneously in the region surrounding the trench, each capable of generating independent earthquake events. What makes the Puerto Rico Trench particularly significant, beyond its depth, is the gravitational anomaly associated with it. The trench is the site of one of the most pronounced negative gravity anomalies ever recorded on Earth. Gravity is measurably weaker directly above the trench than in surrounding areas. This is caused by the density differential between the downgoing plate material and the surrounding mantle. But the practical effect is a deviation from expected gravitational norms, significant enough to be detectable with precision instruments. The ocean surface directly above the trench is measurably lower than surrounding waters due to this reduced gravitational pull, a physical distortion of the sea surface caused by what lies beneath. The seismic history connected to this trench is not theoretical. The region has experienced destructive earthquakes and tsunamis historically linked to the fault systems surrounding the Puerto Rico Trench. The 1918 earthquake off the northwest coast of Puerto Rico, which generated a tsunami killing over 100 people, originated from this tectonic boundary. Scientists studying the trench have warned consistently that the fault systems here are capable of generating megathrust earthquakes, events of magnitude 8.0 or greater, with the potential to send tsunamis directly toward heavily populated Caribbean coastlines and the eastern seaboard of the United States. The warning systems in the Atlantic are less developed than those in the Pacific. The population density of vulnerable coastlines is significant, and the tectonic stress currently accumulating along the boundary has not been fully released. The deepest point in the Atlantic sits 120 kilometers from inhabited land. The gravity above it bends. The fault beneath it is loaded, and the last major event it produced was not the largest it is capable of generating. Kermadec Trench. Northeast of New Zealand, in a stretch of the southwestern Pacific Ocean that most people will never have reason to think about, the seafloor collapses into a vertical darkness that descends 10,047 meters below the surface. That is 6.22 miles of water column pressing down on a narrow geological fracture that ranks as the third deepest place on Earth, surpassed only by the Tonga Trench and the Mariana Trench. The Kermadec Trench does not receive the attention those two names command, but its depth is no less extreme. its geological violence no less real, and its biological discoveries no less significant. The trench was formed by the subduction of the Pacific Plate beneath the Indo-Australian Plate along one of the most seismically active boundaries in the southwestern Pacific. The Kermadec subduction zone extends approximately 1,200 kilometers in length, running roughly parallel to the Kermadec Island chain, a remote series of volcanic islands that exist precisely because of the tectonic forces driving the trench's formation. Subduction at this boundary occurs at a rate of approximately 6 centimeters per year, a pace that generates continuous geological stress and periodic seismic release. The region surrounding the Kermadec Trench experiences frequent earthquakes, including deep focus events originating from the subducting slab itself at depths exceeding several hundred kilometers beneath the surface. At 10,047 meters, the conditions at the bottom of the Kermadec Trench represent one of the most extreme environments on the planet. Pressure at maximum depth reaches approximately 1,000 times atmospheric pressure at sea level. Water temperature at the floor hovers just above freezing, and no natural light has ever reached the bottom. The sediment that accumulates on the trench floor arrives from the surface over time scales measured in thousands of years, carrying with it organic material that forms the foundation of a deep-sea food chain operating entirely without photosynthesis. Scientific expeditions into the Kermadec Trench have returned findings of considerable biological significance. Amphipods, small crustacean scavengers, have been collected from the deepest sections of the trench in significant numbers, demonstrating that complex invertebrate life persists at pressures that destroy most cellular structures. More remarkably, snailfish have been documented at extreme depths within the trench system, consistent with discoveries made in other Pacific trenches. Microbial communities living in the sediment at maximum depth have been found to be metabolically active, processing organic material in conditions previously assumed to be incompatible with biological function. The New Zealand government has recognized the ecological significance of the Kermadec region by establishing the Kermadec Ocean Sanctuary, protecting the waters surrounding the trench from commercial fishing and mining activity. The sanctuary covers approximately 620,000 square kilometers, representing one of the largest fully protected marine areas ever designated. The trench descends over 10,000 meters. The plate boundary above it remains seismically active. The ecosystem at its bottom functions in permanent darkness, and the full extent of what lives at 10,047 meters remains scientifically incomplete. Tonga Trench. In the southwestern Pacific Ocean, northeast of the Tonga Island chain, the seafloor surrenders to a depth that places it among the most extreme points on the entire planet. The Tonga Trench descends 10,182 meters below the ocean surface. That measurement makes it the deepest trench in the southern hemisphere and the second deepest oceanic trench on Earth, surpassed only by the Mariana Trench. It is not a geological footnote. It is an abyss of such magnitude that the full vertical distance from its floor to the ocean surface exceeds the cruising altitude of commercial aircraft by a significant margin. The Tonga Trench forms the northern section of the Tonga-Kermadec subduction system, one of the longest and most geologically active trench systems in the Pacific Ocean. The system runs approximately 2,150 kilometers in total length, with the Tonga Trench occupying its northern portion and the Kermadec Trench extending southward toward New Zealand. The trench was created by the subduction of the Pacific Plate beneath the Tonga Plate, a small tectonic microplate that forms part of the broader Indo-Australian plate boundary system. The subduction rate at the Tonga Trench is among the fastest ever measured on Earth. The Pacific Plate is diving beneath the Tonga Plate at approximately 15 to 24 centimeters per year. That rate of convergence generates an almost continuous cycle of seismic stress accumulation and release. The seismic record associated with the Tonga subduction zone is extensive and severe. The region has produced some of the deepest and most powerful earthquakes ever recorded. Deep focus earthquakes, events originating hundreds of kilometers below the surface within the subducting Pacific slab, occur here with a frequency that places the Tonga region among the most seismically active points on Earth. These deep focus events are scientifically significant because they originate at depths where rocks should theoretically behave plastically rather than fracturing. yet they produce measurable seismic ruptures regardless. At 10,182 meters, pressure at the floor of the Tonga Trench reaches levels that compress water itself into a measurably denser state. The temperature at maximum depth is just above freezing, and the darkness is total and permanent. Despite these conditions, scientific sampling from the Tonga Trench has confirmed the presence of biological life at extreme depths. Amphipods recovered from deep trench sampling have been found containing traces of persistent organic pollutants, industrial chemicals originating from human activity at the surface, demonstrating that even the most isolated deep-sea environments on Earth are not entirely separated from the consequences of surface civilization. The discovery of synthetic pollutants in organisms living nearly 11 kilometers below the ocean surface represents one of the more disturbing findings in recent deep-sea research. The contamination reached the bottom through the same biological pathways that sustain life there. Organic matter sinking from surface waters carrying chemical compounds absorbed from polluted ocean environments. The Tonga Trench descends nearly 11 kilometers. The plate above it moves faster than almost any other on Earth, and the organisms at its bottom carry evidence of a surface world they have never once been exposed to directly. The depth is confirmed, the contamination is documented, and the subduction beneath it has not slowed. Mariana Trench. In the western Pacific Ocean, east of the Mariana Islands and south of Japan, the ocean floor descends into a place that holds a distinction no other location on Earth can claim. The Mariana Trench reaches a maximum depth of 10,184 meters at its deepest point, a section called Challenger Deep. That is 6.8 miles of water column pressing down on a narrow crescent-shaped trench that stretches approximately 2,150 kilometers in length. It is the deepest place on Earth, not the deepest ocean trench in a region, not the deepest point in a hemisphere, but the single deepest verified location on the entire surface of this planet. The scale of that depth requires a reference point to process. Mount Everest, the tallest mountain on Earth, rises 8,949 meters above sea level. If you placed Mount Everest directly into the Mariana Trench at its deepest point, the summit would sit more than 2,100 meters below the ocean surface. The mountain would be completely submerged with over 2 kilometers of water still above it. The trench does not merely exceed the height of the tallest peak on Earth. It exceeds it by a margin large enough to contain some of the tallest mountains in the United States stacked on top. The trench was formed by the subduction of the Pacific Plate beneath the Mariana Plate along one of the oldest and most studied tectonic boundaries in the Pacific Ocean. The Pacific Plate in this region is among the oldest oceanic crust on Earth, dense and cold from hundreds of millions of years of cooling, which drives it steeply downward into the mantle at the subduction boundary. The angle and rate of this subduction have produced a trench of exceptional depth over geological timescales that dwarf human civilization entirely. At 10,184 meters, the pressure at Challenger Deep reaches approximately 1,086 times the atmospheric pressure at sea level. That translates to roughly 15,750 pounds of force, pressing on every square inch of any object at the bottom. The water temperature at maximum depth hovers between 1 and 4 degrees. No sunlight penetrates below approximately 1,000 meters, meaning the bottom exists in darkness so complete that it has persisted uninterrupted for longer than complex life has existed on Earth. Despite these conditions, life exists at the bottom of the Mariana Trench. Single-celled organisms called foraminifera have been found living in the sediment at Challenger Deep. Microbial communities thrive in the mud at maximum depth. Amphipods have been collected in significant numbers, and even small fish have been documented at extreme depths within the trench system. Only 3 descents by human beings to Challenger Deep have ever been completed. The first was in 1960 by Jacques Picard and Don Walsh. The second was filmmaker James Cameron in 2012. A small number of subsequent dives have followed using advanced submersible technology. The deepest place on Earth has been visited by fewer people than have walked on the surface of the moon. The pressure at its floor has no comparison in any environment a human being can reach and return from. Challenger Deep is real, the depth is confirmed, and most of it remains completely unexplored. Kola Super Deep Borehole. On the Kola Peninsula in northwestern Russia, There is a metal cap welded shut over a hole in the ground that most people walk past without a second glance. The cap is unremarkable, and the structure around it is abandoned and rusting. But beneath that cap, a borehole descends 162 meters straight into the earth. That is 7.6 miles of darkness so narrow that a human being could not fit inside it, drilled over 2 decades by Soviet scientists who believed they could reach the Earth's crust and understand what lay beneath. It is the deepest man-made hole ever created, and the Earth eventually made them stop. The project began in 1970, initiated by the Soviet Union during a period of intense scientific competition with the West. The goal was not to extract resources, it was purely scientific, to drill deeper into the Earth's crust than any previous attempt and retrieve physical samples from depths that no instrument had ever directly accessed. The Kola Peninsula was selected based on its geological characteristics, specifically the ancient Precambrian rock of the Baltic Shield, which scientists believed would provide the most direct access to deep crust material. The project was called the Kola Super Deep Borehole, and it represented the most ambitious subsurface drilling operation ever attempted by any nation. Progress was slow and methodical. The drill did not descend in a single continuous operation. The borehole was advanced in stages with equipment changes and technical modifications required at various depth milestones. By the early 1980s, the project had already broken the world record for deepest borehole, surpassing a previous record held by an American drilling project. The Soviets continued. By 1989, the borehole had reached its maximum depth of 12,162 meters, a record that has never been broken and stands to this day. What the drilling encountered on the way down dismantled several foundational assumptions of geological science. Scientists had predicted that rock at approximately 9,000 meters would transition from granite to basalt, a denser rock type expected based on seismic data interpretations. No such transition occurred. The rock remained granite throughout. More unexpectedly, the deep rock was saturated with water, free-flowing water at depths where no water should have been able to exist. The water was not surface water that had percolated down. Isotopic analysis confirmed it had been produced by the rock itself through mineral processes occurring under extreme pressure. It had never been part of any surface water cycle. The temperature at maximum depth reached 180 degrees, far exceeding the 100 degrees C scientists had projected. That heat is what stopped the drilling. The equipment could not function at those temperatures. The Earth itself imposed the limit. The borehole was sealed in 1995 and the facility was abandoned. The site on the Kola Peninsula now sits derelict, the equipment corroding and the buildings empty. Mount Everest stands 8,149 meters. Mount Fuji rises 3,176 meters. Combined, they reach 12,125 meters. The Kola Super Deep Borehole comes within 363 meters of that combined height. It is a hole so deep it nearly equals two of the world's most iconic mountains stacked directly on top of each other. The cap is still there, the hole beneath it is still open, and at 12,162 meters below the surface, the temperature of the rock has never once dropped. If these stories of the Earth's deepest reaches have changed the way you look at the ground beneath your feet, please subscribe and like the channel. We are unearthing the history and the mysteries that have been hidden for eons. Help us grow this community of explorers. Our next deep dive into the unknown will open soon.